having done all of that and seen New Atheism run its course, and it's now no longer like the talk of the town, in retrospect, what do you think is the main thing that the New Atheists got wrong about God?
I think what they got wrong, I'd say two factors. The about God in your question, I think, is very perceptive. They did get things wrong about God, but they got wrong ways to talk about these things. And they decided that aggression and mockery would be the best way to deal with it. And that was a fatal mistake, it seems to me, especially for people that claim to have some kind of intellectual pretension. Ad hominem arguments, mockery and all that get nowhere. But they tried that very forcibly. But what they got wrong about God, I think if I had to come out with one point, was relegating the God of the Bible to be the kind of what I would call a God of the gaps, gods of the ancient world. We don't understand lightning, so we postulate a God of lightning who will disappear once we do a rigorous scientific analysis of lightning. In other words, God is a placeholder for the things we don't yet understand from a rational or scientific point of view. And I think that was a huge mistake. And I puzzled over this for a long time. It was Stephen Hawking that really enabled me to see what was going on, because his kind of formulation towards the end of his life was that you had to choose between science and God. And I thought that was really odd, because I could see very clearly, and learned as a teenager from serious sources like Alfred North Whitehead, filtered through C.S. Lewis, yes, but they were serious sources, that there was a deep connection between the rise of modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries and the biblical worldview. And I thought, this is very strange. Here's Hawking in Newton's chair, and Newton didn't make that mistake. In fact, when he wrote the Principia Mathematica, which is arguably the most famous book in the history of science, the early editions at least carried with them an invitation to thinking people, and Newton hoped it would convince thinking people that there was a deity. And the thought behind that was, this is what I understand of the universe. And it's what I understand leads me to believe in an intelligent creator behind it. Now, Hawking was saying you've got to choose between science and God, but suddenly the penny dropped. And I realized something very simple that I should have realized years before. And that is, if you define God to be a God of the gaps, that is a placeholder for the things you don't yet understand. If that's your definition of God, then you have to choose between God and science by definition. And once that penny had dropped, and I often used to amuse myself in a way by saying to audiences, of course, you've all read the first line in the Bible, in the beginning God created the bits of the universe we don't yet understand, which puts the point, created the heavens and the earth, and that is really grammatically a merism. It spans everything. That is, created everything. The bits we do and the bits we don't. But here we're sitting in a room with famous paintings, some of them by Hockney. And as you look at them, if you understand about art, I don't understand much, but I like looking at art. If you're really trained in it, you can see much more of the genius of the artist because you understand more of the way art works than a person who can't. And it's exactly that with my view of the universe. The more I understand of it, and the way in which it's mathematically describable, for example, the more those things point me towards a creator. They don't prove the existence. Proof is, in the mathematical sense, we don't get anywhere. But they do give evidence. They are pointers.
Boom. The more I understand the universe, in the way it's mathematically describable, the more those things point me toward a creator. What a great answer in rebuttal to the seemingly ancient argument of the God of the gaps by many new atheists, which was never an accurate definition of God to begin with, as Lennox says. Now, Lennox is a mathematician from Oxford University, and this would be one line of reasoning that he would use to back his statement about the universe. He would say something like this: the more we discover about the universe, the more astonishing it becomes that it's mathematically intelligible at all. Mathematics comes from minds, not rocks, not chaos, not blind particles. Yet the universe operates according to elegant laws that the human mind can actually comprehend. So here, John Lennox is arguing that this is exactly what you would expect if a rational mind created the universe and made us in his image. So in other words, science doesn't bury God. It reveals a universe that looks deeply ordered, rational, and intentionally understandable.
And so I think that was a huge mistake, painting God as the God of the gaps. And the one that's related to it is misunderstanding what faith is.
Mm-hmm.
And redefining it as believing where you know there's no evidence.
Sure.
Which led to the most ridiculous sort of statements by Christopher Hitchens, for example. Our faith is not a faith, our belief is not a belief. He was wrestling with the idea that Dawkins mainly had caused a shift in redefining faith, which is an ordinary word, it's not a religious word. It simply means trust, belief, and leads to the first logical question: what are the grounds for your believing that? To blind faith, which is believing where there's no evidence and which is dangerous. And so there was that massive output of pressure on people that here's Lennox, he's a man of faith. That means he believes there's no evidence. There's no point in talking to him. It was a very clever move, but it backfired because I think more serious thinkers began to see that Einstein was right when he spoke about faith, and it wasn't faith in God. I cannot conceive, he once wrote, of a genuine scientist without that faith. He meant every scientist must believe that science can be done, or to put it in his way, every scientist must believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. You can't do science without that. And John Polkinghorne, taught me quantum mechanics at Cambridge. And in his books, he kept emphasizing this, that physics is powerless to explain its faith. And he used the word faith unashamedly, it said so, in the mathematical intelligibility of the universe, because you've got to trust that, believe that, have faith in that before you can do any science at all.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge mistake. And I think people have begun to realize that, and younger people. In fact, I've just brought out a couple of weeks ago a new book for young people, Science and God. Do you have to choose?
Yeah. I think for me, the moment of reckoning was as an undergraduate being introduced to the problem of induction from David Hume. And
yes.
I remember at the time nearly making a provocative video about it that was going to be called something like, yes, I'm a person of faith. Because I'd suddenly realized that, although it's quite an obvious point to me now, there are all kinds of things which we believe that we don't have any evidence for. And you can list them off easily, things like the existence of the external world,
yes,
or of other minds or whatnot. But the problem of induction in particular was so empirical, and it came from such an empiricist, just sort of scientist, atheist, heroic figure of philosophy, just throwing up his hands and saying, we have no justification for this, and yet I believe it. That made me realize, oh, okay, so we do that all the time. The question then is, what becomes a legitimate kind of faith and what becomes an illegitimate kind of faith? And the problem with the new atheists, I think, is that they were a bit careless in setting their criteria. A bit like, you remember like logical positivism was a
Yes.
huge movement in the 20th century
Yeah.
that said for a statement to be meaningful, it must either be empirically verifiable or like analytically, mathematically
Yes.
true by definition. And it was really popular for a while. And ultimately it falls because it fails by its own standard. Because the statement that statements must be empirically verifiable or mathematically true is not empirically verifiable nor mathematically true. And in hindsight, you look at it and you go, you just set the bar too high for yourself. And I think what the new atheists did was they said, we won't believe anything without sufficient scientific evidence. And they just set the bar too high and left themselves open to attacks from people who said, well, go on then, prove the existence of the external world, prove induction, prove the existence of other minds, prove that maths will work in 5 minutes from now, and you just can't do these things.
Yes, that's right. I would encourage you, by the way, to make that video. I think it could be real fun.
I think I might do that actually still.
As Lennox says, many atheists have misunderstood what faith actually is and redefined it as believing where there is actually no evidence. And this is something that I've seen in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and in many debates and arguments. And what they have done is actually strawman the heck out of what the reality of truth faith is. But if we're being intellectually honest, then also Christians have strawmanned the arguments of many atheists as well and not understood the rationality behind their arguments. And what this is going to take in order for us to understand each other is humility on both sides to genuinely understand the belief that each is actually holding and work from that rationality to actually have an intelligent conversation, to put ourselves in the shoes of what the different opposing world belief is. But back into the deeper context of the argument. So from a Christian perspective, the Greek word for faith is actually pistis. And this is the faith that Christians have, that being a confident trust in the evidence that Jesus Christ has given us and that has actually stood the test of time for over 2,000 years. It's not empty blind faith, but is a faith that has been tested and has stood the test of time. And it's even a faith that a lot of secularists say that is made up, that it's fictional, that it's not true. And a line of reasoning that Christians and apologists have in defending the claims of the gospel and within is that if this was a story that was made up, then one true fact about this is that it wouldn't have been the first eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ's empty tomb being women if this was a fabricated lie, because the testimony of women was not valuable in those days. So if you really want someone to believe you in this fabrication, you're not going to say or use a line of reasoning that men or people in general wouldn't have believed to begin with, which lends more credibility to the truth and the reality of Jesus Christ in the evidence of his empty tomb. And lastly, if it was made up, more than likely it wouldn't have been made up in a place or the setting, that being Jerusalem, in a place where it was open to scrutiny and the ability to be tested, but maybe they would do it in some remote location where it was hard to verify and report the claims. But no, it's in the heart of Israel, that being Jerusalem, where these claims could be debunked and exposed as fake. So we have a living reality that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life in the history of Christ. And this is not a blind, empty faith. Let us both be honest, the secularist and the Christian, to understand the heart of the conversation. And that's what I love about Alex, is he's humble enough to actually hear what is being said and grow in his humility and understanding. And I pray that he would come to the knowledge and salvation of Christ, just as I pray that you would as well. Thank you for watching. God bless.